Okay. Given that the Board of Education is under a tight time frame, I'm going to go ahead and call this special meeting of the Board of Finance to order, 7 o'clock, Tuesday, January 15th. Thank you all for coming. We've got a busy agenda today, so the way we're going to do this is split up the meeting. We're going to try to cover the Board of Education topics now so that board can adjourn for their regular meeting, which starts at 8. And then we have several things to cover just for the Board of Finance. I'd like to start with a couple of comments on the budget. First of all, I appreciate the chance to have sat in on your session Saturday before last. I thought it was very informative, and I watched a bit of it afterwards since I couldn't stay the whole time, but I think it's very helpful to have those open sessions so that we can get a sense for how you all are deliberating your budget. The high-level comments that I have before we get into the presentation that you all wanted to deliver are as follows. First of all, I think on accounting transparency, I think the accounting transparency is excellent. Line item detail, multi-year data, budget, revised budget, estimates for next year, and variances. I think all of that is actually very clear. I'm glad to see that you came in at just barely under 3%, which was the far out endpoint of the guidance that this board had provided earlier, and anything you could get done to get closer to 2.5% certainly would be appreciated. I know you all are still in the process of reviewing that budget, but as a board, we certainly would encourage you to see what you could do to cut that further. We're going to have further questions on some of the capital expenditures that you've proposed in there, which I won't get into tonight, but I did want to just raise two questions that came to mind. I'd like to talk at some point a little bit more about the ventilation proposals that are in there, and specifically how it ties to some of the air conditioning that we're going to be discussing soon. That wasn't clear at first glance, and I'd also like to know about the Darien High School security booth and whether that's going to entail additional staffing or exactly how that works. I know you all have probably discussed that in detail, and I've missed hearing that part of the tape, so I will go back to that, but those were two areas of questions that I had. So A+ on accounting transparency. There were a couple other areas of transparency I had more concerns about. One of those I guess I would describe as statistical transparency. So we have a lot of information about enrollment, but when you really think about statistics in the presentation and in the data that's provided, there is not a lot of that, and I think that actually there should be more of that, and I would, of course, encourage the members of the Board of Education to ask for that statistical transparency. What do I mean by that? One of the statistics, the two main statistics that are talked about are enrollment data and spending per student compared to the Durgay schools. And if I kind of look at that, there's a lot of other statistics that I think are important to review. So this could be things around staffing levels and different types of staff, administrative versus in-classroom staff, and trying to look at those trends and how all that is evolving over time. I think given concerns that you read about in the press, let alone here, about the proliferation of administrative staff and all of those roles, I think having some statistical transparency about what those roles are and how they've trended over time is something that would be pretty important. I think also being able to look at those statistics as well as the dollars and comparing them to other school districts would be very instructive and useful. I think that having ratios of comparing the various types of staff that you have versus the students that you have and comparing that against other schools, not just in the Durgay, but what collectively people might view as best in class or most efficient, I think is a good way to calibrate what we're doing in this town versus what we might see in other districts elsewhere. There's been some of that in the past, but again, I would encourage you to take a deeper look at that. I think we would benefit from statistical transparency. One further comment on that is I know every year we talk about spending per student or per capita and comparing that with the Durgay schools. As I've said in prior public comments, that's an input-based metric where we're talking about how much money we're putting into the system. We're really not talking as much about output-based metrics, which is what are we really trying to do? What problem are we really trying to solve? What objective are we trying to meet in terms of delivering education for those students? And so, while it's great to have that input metric, a lot of times in government, having that kind of metric just makes it a race to the top to see who's spending the most, because people and the public get that in their mind as being the end-all be-all of statistical measurement for the district and their personal metric as to whether the district is doing the right thing. And so I would encourage you maybe not to replace that metric as much as I might like it, but to try to add some output-based metrics as part of your regular budget discussion so that we can talk about how well the district is doing in terms of delivering results as opposed to how well they're spending money as an input. And then finally, the other area of transparency I wanted to talk about was analytical transparency. And there I think I've got most of my questions, and I think you all would do yourself and the town a service by enhancing that aspect of both your presentations as well as your discussions. I noted, by the way, on Saturday when I sat there that a lot of the things I'm about to talk about were questions that were raised by members of the Board of Education. And so these are things like, and I'll talk a little bit about special education, not to get in trouble about that again, but if you think about just something like out-of-district tuition, there's not a lot of analytical transparency that would give us insight into the nature of that number and give us the ability to judge whether that's okay or whether that's something that requires further scrutiny. For example, if it were the case that most out-of-district spending were for students with serious medical issues or in need of services that simply couldn't be economically developed in town, you might look at that and say, okay, well, there's no way really for us to develop that, and we understand why those students have been placed in those types of environments and why we're having to support that tuition. But on the other hand, if the preponderance was really around children who needed reading, supplemental reading assistance, and simply we're not getting that as part of what the district provides, then you kind of start to question as somebody who's looking at the budget and saying, okay, medical cases, that's one thing, but reading instruction, that seems like another thing. And so by having some statistical transparency and analytical transparency about the nature of how that money is being spent, I think gives the public a more sound basis to make a judgment as to whether this is something that requires some scrutiny and we should be worried about or have a town discussion about, versus something that makes complete sense and we understand why that money is being spent, and it's really sort of beyond debate or discussion, if you will. So that's an area where I think just broadly across that budget that certainly the town, and I know this board, would benefit from, is to have additional analytical transparency. There's a lot of what you're doing in there. There's a lot less about why you're doing it and why these things should be thought of as good decisions. I don't doubt that they are. I know you spend a lot of time thinking about it, but the lack of analytical transparency makes it hard for us to come to that conclusion. One other example I would cite is the decision that's being considered to introduce the psychologists into the local schools. The rationale that was given in the presentation that I saw was that was, again, not to be pejorative, but that was something that had worked in Westport. And so if I think about that, again, the lack of analytical transparency makes it hard to judge whether that really is a good decision. So if I were to think about it, it's kind of starting with, okay, what problem are we trying to solve? Well, it's students having enough resources and adults that they can talk to about some of the issues they're facing. Well, how is that happening today? It's teachers, other administrators, social workers, they're all sort of providing some of that to a degree. And then a conclusion that says, well, we need to add resources, and are those in fact the right resources, or is it some other kind of resource? How are other school districts doing this? Not just Westport, but other schools. What's best in class in that regard? What type of profile is the exact profile we need? I note that for $71,000, which was the compensation that was apparent in what I saw, with all due respect, executive assistants in New York City make that much money. So the question would be, what's the horsepower of the individuals that you are hiring to put into that? And again, I'm not judging whether that's good or bad. It's just because I don't have any analytical transparency about why that decision was being made that way, that it's hard to look at that and judge quickly whether, okay, that's fine, that's absolutely a great idea, no further discussion required, versus, that's kind of an odd decision, or it's not really transparent, I've got questions about that. I just found throughout a great deal of the budget discussion there was this lack of analytical transparency that was hard for us to, or at least for me, to look at the decisions were being made and not have further questions or not wonder somehow whether we were in fact getting a best-in-class result or a best-in-class approach to some of those decisions. So I would encourage you, as you think about it from an accounting standpoint, certainly to revisit it versus some of the guidance that we provided earlier. Any improvements that you can make on that and come in with a lower number would be appreciated. And then further, if not for this budget cycle, then certainly in future budget cycles, this notion of additional statistical transparency and analytical transparency around the why of what you all are deciding versus simply the what, certainly would help me in my role in evaluating what you all are proposing. So those were the comments I had on the Board of Education budget. Before we get to the proposal on electricals, does anyone have anything that they would like to add? Senator?
Well, let me echo what John's saying. In fact, I was sitting in the family room with my wife before I came over here, wondering if I'd run again. If I were nominated, I might run again. This is my 8th year, and I am coming into the curmudgeon class.
You've been there for a while.
In fact, the first meeting I had was on the shuffle, because I came in to fill out somebody's term. And then I think it was displaced anger. I was the butt of a lot of angst over the unfortunate SPED issue, which thankfully is behind us. But I really just want to comment on what John's saying around the Board of Education. You're all here. You're advocates for our children who are privileged to live in this town of great beneficence. And it's just not a natural act for the Board of Education to do anything except support our children. It's not a natural act. But what we can ask you to do is to look beyond the financials. I mean, this is what I do for a living. I don't ask you to become cost accountants, but to look outside of our boundaries for best practices. These are not algorithms. These are not complicated formulae. And ask yourselves, is there a way that we can do things to measure ourselves differently? To cast another prism on what we're doing? To raise the perspective so that you're not dependent on the management team. And we don't ask you to be the management team. But it strikes me that we have limited see-through ability year over year of what you, in fact, have some control over. Limited. I commend you to read the library budget. They come in every year, and they can tell you the BTUs per square foot of their buildings. That's just an example. I love to read their report. I don't see any of that ever from the Board of Education. Now, what's frustrating to us is, as you know, we, under our charter, don't have any ability to look at line items. But we would expect you to do that. And we would expect you to huddle with your management team. It's just frustrating for me to sit here one more year and really see no change in the budget process, none. And just for the record, you may not see this, but we've made fundamental changes in our review of budgets with our Board of Selectmen. We have fewer meetings, we have greater collegiality, we have greater visibility, and somewhat paradoxically, we have got our administrators, we've given them more independence, not less, more. And their budget year over year last year, and our last year fiscal year, was 1.04% year over year. So they're doing more with less. This isn't a lament. This is a comment, just offering a long view. I think you can be better. I think we can be better. And we look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Senator. Other comments? Okay. Thank you. So we want to move on to the special appropriation regarding wiring and air conditioning. And do you all want to kick off with a discussion of that?
Thank you. I'm going to use my notes more than I typically do because we have so many meetings tonight. I want to make sure I talk to you about the right thing. We are here to request an off-cycle budget request of $355,000 for electrical panels at 3 of our elementary schools, Holmes, Hindley, and Royal. I'll give you a little bit of background on it. Superintendent Elliott Landon joined us July 1st of this 2018, and in reviewing our schools, he had concerns regarding the electrical capabilities at these schools. In particular, he saw increased demands on the system based on our technology as a tool for students, and he had concern about the lack of air conditioning to provide appropriate educational environments for students. This second concern proved out yet again with another intense 10-day heat wave in August and September. Students were shuffled kind of through around the classrooms, taught in hallways, and we put as many measures as we could to keep our students safe in learning and as cool as possible with the resources that we had. Teachers were reporting measuring classrooms at over 95 degrees. And when you have, kids, teachers, 20 people more in a room for 7 hours a day trying to learn, I think we're hard pressed not to start to question, is that a good learning environment for our students? Dr. Landon's concerns echoed the concerns voiced by the board, our staff, and the parent community over the years. The concerns were about basic health and learning, but we had yet to see a fiscally responsible plan. And so Darien basically does what we do. We dug deep and we figured out a way to try to push through it. The simple truth is the plans presented to us before talked about central air, and in buildings that are over 60 years old, it becomes really financially unfeasible to take on a project like that. So in September, Dr. Landon brought the board a proposal to address our cooling and capacity needs. The board was encouraged to see his plan, but authorized, instead of moving forward with the plan, him to commission an electrical engineering study to determine the most accurate costs that we could for what this would entail. Dr. Landon and his team came back to us in November, and the board received a report prepared by Burrell Gallagher and Associates, which I believe you have in its entirety to review. It outlined what would be both the design and engineering fees for the 3 schools, Hindley, Holmes, and Royal, and you have those broken down by school in your packets. Mike Lynch and Mike Feeney are here tonight. I didn't see Mr. Lynch come in, but oh, there he is. Are here tonight, so if you have technical questions, they are happy to answer them. Also, for the first time, the board heard that the optimal educational environment for students is 75 to 78 degrees. With these facts in mind, while the board is always respectfully hesitant to come to the town with off-cycle requests, we do feel duty-bound within our responsibilities to come forward with this project at this time. Of additional benefit is within our current budget was already planned an electrical panel replacement at Ox Ridge, so there's a chance to capture some economy of scales by doing all these schools with the same vendors at this time. Our belief is we've invested in tech as one of the tools for our students, and so that seems to at this point require not more, as Mr. Lynch I'm sure will talk to if needed, not more capacity from our current system, but new panels to deliver that capacity. We also believe that we are a town that consistently reinforces the idea of quality education and the importance of public education. And we believe that our classrooms and learning environment should match those beliefs in both resources, experiences, and basic parity between our buildings. There were some questions that we've kind of received through different avenues that I'm happy to give quick answers to, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, and or I can rely on Mr. Feeney or Mr. Lynch. Mr. Lynch has reported that it will cost the district $25,600 for the addition of 32 more air conditioning units within the district at a cost of $800 per unit. These costs will be met within the Board of Education budget. Our timeline, was, and we hope still is, to have March and April to address homeschool. Royal will be addressed in April, and Hindley in May and June. We will work diligently to meet this goal, but it does depend on how we fund this project, what additional approvals are needed, how we schedule those meetings. But I will note that we've been encouraged by the willingness of the town boards and bodies to engage in this conversation, including the Board of Selectmen's unanimous support for this project. We attempt to manage effectively and efficiently. As you all know, as required, we return unused funds to the town every year. We did so again this year with $700,000. And so, we come to you with this off-cycle request really only because we see it is an urgent need in our schools at this time. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or call phone a friend in the back there.
Jim, you spent a lot of time on questions and analysis of this. You want to pick up?
I mean, I have a bunch of questions which I've kind of aggregated from members of the board here and others. I guess, when Dr. Landon sort of noticed this problem, I guess when you first got here almost a year ago, like, is there any data that you were presented in terms of, like, do you guys have a sort of overall list of the number of classrooms in each school, on each floor, how many have air conditioning, how many don't?
Yeah, so Mr. Lynch has our number of classrooms. We do have students within their educational needing and IEPs that require air conditioners. So we do actually own some units. However, we don't generally air condition classrooms. So when that student moves to the next classroom, as they progress in their years, the air conditioner moves as well.
But is there a list? Like, does the school keep a list? Like, for instance, at homes, like, on each of the 3 floors, we have this many rooms, this many have air conditioning, this many are wired for air conditioning, and this many have been previously wired for air conditioning. Like, do you guys keep an inventory of that? Or,
yes,
like,
Mike, you have those lists, but...
And so is that what, so I guess part of just echoing what John said earlier, I think in terms of looking at this capital expenditure, which it's, $350,000, it's hard to sort of really dig into it and understand, is this everything we should be spending? Is it more than we should be spending? Is it not enough? Is there more investment that we need in the schools? Is this sort of going to put an air conditioning in every classroom, on every floor, in every school, absent what you mentioned about Oxbridge?
The goal is to air condition every classroom.
And I guess, so do you have access to this data that lists what rooms, and have you guys all reviewed that? Or?
So I don't think the board has asked for that specific information. Our goal is to air conditioning every classroom for our students. So Mr. Lynch has told us that in order to do that, we will need to buy more units. We will wire them.
Hi.
Sure. So no, we have not asked for the play-by-play. We leave that in the hands of Mr. Lynch as a professional. Go for it.
Sure. We have that list. We keep a list every year, and in July, end of July, beginning of August, when the principals start getting their schedules and they know what children they're going to have in their schools that year, they give us a list of rooms that are going to need air conditioning. And so we might not have to change an air conditioner because there's a kid coming in to that room, so we have to add another one to the room where the kid exiting is going to. And that goes all the way up through the middle school. So we do keep a record. I didn't bring it. I did share it with the engineer before he wrote that report, and I also walked all the buildings with 2 members of the firm to come up with that report that you have.
Okay, so what percentage would you say of the rooms in those 3 elementary schools are already wired for air conditioning? That have had it?
Royal has about 68%. Hindley has about 40%. And Holmes has about 45%.
And how many actual air conditioners are operating in a given year? Like in 2018, just take the summer.
Well, in the summer they're not. But when we start up in August, okay, so 17 and 12 and 5 is 37, 38. And then at the middle school, I probably have another 30. So probably about 68, 60 off the top of my head.
So is that about half the rooms have?
No, the middle school, you have about 70% of the 2 floors that aren't air conditioned. They have air conditioners in those rooms. You know, the top floor is fully air conditioned. So like in Royal, say there's 24 classrooms, I need 5 air conditioners. So there's 19 in that building. Hindley's got 25 classrooms, I got 17 air conditioners, so I have 9 rooms that are done. So, you know, yeah, we do have numbers. I'm trying to give them to you off the top of my head.
So Mike, I would ask, if you're asking for 32, I think back to Jim's original questions, how many do we have now? And if the ultimate goal is every single room has to have one, how many are we looking at?
But we're asking for 32.
We're asking for 32.
Okay.
We're going to take out of our operating budget. We have air conditioners for all the other rooms, and I have 3 spare, there's 2 different sizes we use. And I have 3 spare of the larger size and 2 spare of the smaller size. So if something punks out during the year, we could just change it.
So how many are we looking at in total then? Forget whose budget it's coming out of. How many rooms are we trying to air condition in total?
We're trying to air condition 32 additional rooms, and in some of the rooms, we're going to take the electric and run it into these new panels to kind of more evenly distribute the electric load that's coming out of the main distribution panel.
Okay, so back to my original question. How many rooms in total are we looking at?
Air conditioning?
Did we just say that we're trying to get every room air conditioned?
We're trying to get
Right?
all of our,
Is that 110? Is that 140?
How many classrooms?
I know it's all in here.
I'm just trying to, I'm trying to solve for X, lack of a better word, right? We're getting 32. We have X amount in there right now.
Yes.
So we're gonna need how many in the future if the ultimate goal is to have every room air conditioned?
We need 32 and we're done.
32 and we're done.
We're done. We may need a few at the middle school, a few air conditioners, but the middle school is not included in this because a good majority of those rooms are already done, and there is ample spare electric distributed throughout the building from when it was built. They took care of future needs.
So I think if you go through the report, it breaks it down by school, how many BTUs, have the voltage and the amps that are needed, the classrooms by size, small, medium, and a full size. It'll break it down by school. For instance, I think the first one here is homes, and it's 9 full-size air conditioners for 18,800 BTUs, 208 volts and 12 amps. 1 medium size, 10,000 BTU, 120 volts and 8 amps, and 5 small size offices, 8,000 BTU, 120 amps, 120 volts, 6 amps. And it continues to do that for each school as you go through.
I think that was the electricity that you need to provide each one of those rooms, not the actual air conditioners, right?
No, it is
No,
both.
it's the units and the electricity.
They give you the actual air conditioners, and then they take them with what's already being used, and they figured that there is enough spare voltage in each building if we go this route. If you were to go the route of central air, which is what the building condition survey had noted, you would have to upgrade the electric coming in off the street, new transformers, new electric mains, and so this is a more economical way to achieve the same goal.
Yeah, one thing I noticed that was helpful in this report, that it looks like the power coming into the building is adequate to support all this, and that these investments really are about panels, circuit breakers, and wiring to get that power to run these particular units in those classrooms, which is good. One of the
That's
questions
correct.
that I'd posed publicly before was around capacity. One of the things I think this board doesn't like is that if we're going to spend money to then have to revisit that 3 years later because we didn't put in enough capacity when we had a chance to do that. And so have you raised that question? I recognize that you're not increasing the power that's being brought into the buildings, but there are, of course, panels, circuit breakers, and wiring. If you think about trying to forecast 5-10 years down the road, some way that this might actually, that this capacity that you're installing, not electrical capacity, but delivery capacity, to use a word, that somehow you'd run out of that before that time period expires? And did you have a discussion about sort of what are we actually installing here, and can we take advantage of the fact that we've got the project, the electricians, the unions, all these guys here, to maybe get a little ahead of yourselves in terms of adding capacity just to minimize future expense and having to revisit some of this stuff like we're about to do with the police department.
And this is kind of thinking towards a larger facilities plan.
We did look at that.
What
And
was your conclusion?
the conclusion was that this plan here is the way to go.
Okay.
If, as an example, if I was to take home school, and if you looked at what the building condition survey had shown as expansion of the building, I'm removing 2 portable classrooms that are, the portable classrooms, everything in them is electric heat, electric ventilation, electric lights. They're very much, they use probably 2 or 3 times the electricity that a standard classroom would use, just because of the way they're built. So if you take away 2 portable classrooms, you could, which are already there and being used, you could easily put on 4 to 6 classrooms in an addition without changing your electric load at all. And the electric load there is fine. And so we ran that analysis for all of the schools, just as part of doing our due diligence. And if you see in the report, there is a distribution panel that's needed at Royal, which is different from what's needed at the other buildings. I don't know if this report notes it, but the transformer at Hindley is actually a larger one. It's not an 800, it's 1200, which is what we have at home. So if we had to go to a bigger service there, we're already ahead of the game because the wiring coming into the building is of that larger size, and so is the transformer coming in off the street. So we're a little ahead of the game there if we were to have to do it. And that is what kind of triggered, okay, let's look at all the buildings and make sure we're okay, or do we have, we actually went into looking at, we were going to have to upgrade all the elementaries to 1200, taking into account future expansion and removal of the portables. That was our original premise that we looked at all these buildings at.
Is it also true that you've taken a look at the rooms where you have this air conditioning installed, and when you have a series of really hot days like that, for the capacity that's being planned for each one of those rooms, that as a general matter, it gets you to the temperature to where the collective could say, yes, these students are sufficiently comfortable for this to be a conducive learning environment?
Yes, the BTU formula is it's fairly simple.
Okay.
You know, it's so many BTUs per square foot, and then it's so many BTUs per person in the room, so many BTUs per computer in the room. So when you add all those things up, and then you put in a 15 to 20% fudge factor for, you know, a really bright sunny day, or things like a Monday morning when the thing's been off all weekend, etc. That's the size air conditioner.
Okay, so it's confirmed that once this
Yes.
goes in, that even on really hot days, you should be within the parameters that you're specifying for this.
We know we are based on the ones we've been putting in.
Okay.
And so then I guess, you know, this request here is not necessarily for the air conditioning, which I'm assuming, does that exist in the current budget?
No, they're paying for that out of their existing funds.
It would be in this current year's, it would need to be a purchase, so we would need to make a transfer.
Okay.
It didn't exist. This plan didn't exist when we made our budget.
We normally buy between 12 and 15 air conditioners a year for the last, I'm going to say, 3 or 4 years. Because of the increased needs, you know, a note from, you know, a staff member or an IEP from a student, that triggers who gets the air conditioners. And so we already have a certain number built in the budget. I have 3 of one size and then a couple of the smaller sizes from that purchase I made in the summer.
Okay, so you know, a lot of this request was all about upgrading the actual electrical capacity that gets delivered, not the actual air conditioners. So when you look at, you know, some of the reports in here, it seemed to suggest that the current setup, the current load that's being delivered to the classrooms could already handle that.
No, the current load being delivered into the main building can handle it. And in 2 of the 3 buildings, there's room in the main distribution panel to add on more circuit breakers, you know, more circuit breaker panels around the building. And
yeah, without the additional sub panels.
those panels that are going out in the building, we've taken each building and split it in half, 2 stories, and we've tried to centrally locate the units, the new circuit breaker panels. So you pretty much have one on the left side and one on the right side of each building, and they do 2 stories.
But I guess my question is, can the current panels handle it without dividing the?
No, the current
Dividing them up into
panels,
the
like
two
if you
different-
open up one of the electrical closets and you see the electric panel in there, it's full. Or it might have one spare breaker, and I need to add 7 circuits. So I'm gonna put a new, 20 circuit panel in that space. So I've got some room for growth, and so that I can take some of the existing air conditioning circuits out of another panel. So I have a dedicated electric panel in 2 parts of each building, and those panels will only have air conditioning units on them.
Quick question. So on the memo, it talks about that the heat wave in the first 10 days of the school was one of the triggers, I guess, for you guys to look at this. And then in some of the notes I looked at, it said they've had increased heating days, lack of a better word, over the number of years. Did anybody look at that, chart it? I think this kind of ties back in a little bit what John was saying, was Jamie was saying. I think most of the group on this panel, I guess I'll call it that, are analytical people. Like, I would expect you guys to come in with how many days, if you have a certain amount of days over 90, somebody has charted that over the last 2 or 3 years. Has anybody gone to the classrooms and measured, like somebody's saying it's 95 degrees? That's the first time I heard that.
We do have teachers who measure the classrooms and occasionally report it back into us. No, we haven't gone back. I would say.
We have the data.
Yeah.
I didn't know you wanted it. We have digital building control systems in each building, and I can run trends on at Holmes, at Royal, and at Hindley. Hindley, I'm not ready to run a trend yet. I haven't finished installing that system. That's being done now. But I can run a historical trend on them. We also run a yearly trend through this program, it's Energy Star program. It's called Program Manager. It's what the library uses. I went to school to become certified in using it. And, I could give you BTUs per square foot. I could give you degree days. Going back years, I can give you part of this program. You can compare, you come up with an energy number for your building, and then you see where you rate compared to other buildings. As my classroom test building, I did Hindley School, and then based on what we gave them, the school district got an award from the state of Connecticut for improvement in our energy use. But, I mean, I'm saying it now, but I don't sit there and, blow my horn and show it to everybody, but I mean, it's in a file cabinet somewhere in my office. But it's there. I mean, we do all these things, but we didn't know people were interested in seeing them. We have all that data.
Well, I guess the question is, and I think what you're asking is, like, how many days in May and June and August and September does it actually get over 90 or 95? Like, how many days has it actually been getting up to, I guess, 95 degrees in the classroom? Did this all of a sudden just start happening?
Had it been requested, we would have been happy to bring it. I will say, with that, I still think these buildings need increased electrical capacity needs. So I don't know if just having the data, if that makes or breaks the decision for you. We're happy to bring that to you. But I do think the fact that we have kids and we are experiencing kids in these classrooms with this heat, as stewards of the school and responsible for providing accurate facilities, it's incumbent upon us to come to you. If it helps you to have that data, there's no secret. We're happy to provide it to you. We just did not know it was going to be requested.
Let me comment on that, Tara. You see, there's a great example. Michael is an exceptional employee. I've observed him closely for years. Doesn't get any better. He always has his brief. Share it with us. Anticipate it. Not because we ask you. Because I'm voting for this. This is like apple pie. No problem. But honor us.
Mr. Blackland, we would be happy to honor you, and we are more than happy if there are requests from the Board of Finance and reports they would like to see.
I'm only saying it's an example of what I said before. It's a great example. It just came up. Everybody knows this. I don't nitpick. These are the kind of discussions I rarely discuss. I rarely open my mouth on this stuff. But I just wanted to put some accent on this is a great example how you could become cost accountants, send us back some data. Mike has it. And candidly,
we would be happy to take the lesson the next time we come.
It's a terrific opportunity. There's lots of other examples, I can assure you.
And I think I would say from my seat on this board, I think what I look to do is, when your board reviews and does the research and kind of makes a decision on something, I try to look at all the materials that you all reviewed and then get smart with those and sort of understand how you came to the decision. I guess when I looked at, this quote here and I watched like the 10 minutes of deliberation and read the materials, it just didn't seem like there was unless there were conversations that just, we weren't privy to, that there was a type of sort of analytical discussion around, is this enough of an electrical upgrade? Do we need to do more? Do we need to do less? Should we be thinking about, the questions I've gotten from parents are equally on heat in the classrooms during the summer and the fact that they need to wear the winter coats during the winter. Like, did we look at things like a heat pump? Installing that in each one of the rooms, like how does that cost compare to the air conditioning versus like the $25 million district-wide central air? I think it's, the deeper you guys dig, we'll follow you and do the same amount of work and I would expect come to the same type of decision. But when there's not a lot of information out there, it's frankly, it's hard to make an informed decision.
This gets back to some of my comments about just analytical transparency, which gives us a sense of the why this decision is being made, alternatives considered, and even the point that I'd raised, a couple of months ago when this first came out, that I specifically wanted to talk about capacity and is this enough capacity, and there really was just not a discussion about that in these materials. I had to kind of bring it up in this forum to say, as I'd said before, had you all thought about that, and is there any risk that we're going to run into having to revisit this decision in 2 or 3 years because we didn't give enough thought to that? So I think just echoing what these gentlemen said, the more of that, or erring on that, on the side of providing those types of analyses to give us insights into why you're making those decisions and not just what they are, again, would, I think, help in terms of how all these boards cooperate and work together. Because if we have something like that, what will happen is we'll read the report and we just got no questions, right? Because those types of analyses were simply included in there, and they were either in answering questions that we posed before or, to the senator's point, in anticipation of those questions. So
we
other
welcome your
comments?
suggestions, and we'll keep the dialogue open on communications going forward, and always let us know if there's something you see missing. We'd be happy to provide it.
Other questions or comments about that?
I guess, Mike, I would just ask, did you look at anything like a heat pump, something that can, I know so many of the schools are freezing cold during the winter. Like, did you look at that type of solution?
We looked at heat pumps, and they're not very energy efficient. We usually find it when there's a problem with heating, it's a room specific, and it's usually a thermostat's not working, a damper's stuck open. It's not building wide. It's we had one wing at Ox Ridge this past fall, and it was an electrical issue that was not allowing a bunch of units to come on, and we got it fixed. Once we finally figured out what the problem was, it was a 2-day repair. But the boilers all work. And the ventilation systems all work. So the issues are control and an individual unit in a room not working.
I think we've made investments in the controls, but I know,
Yes.
My kids will come over and tell me that the schools are freezing during the winter, certain classrooms, on certain floors. So I want to make sure we're addressing both.
I think that's a different issue a little bit than what's in front of us behind. But we hear reports from similar schools, and I definitely know Mr. Lynch is on that.
I know there was a room, I'll give you a quick anecdote. There was a room at Middlesex that was cold. last Thursday and Friday, and we took care of it right away. As soon as we found out about it, we went there and took care of it. So, yeah, for 2 days, there's kids going home telling their parents, my room's freezing. But the other 6 periods, that kid was in the room was fine.
They never talk about that.
That gets less attention.
You know, these comments, I think, were at, you know, at homes and other schools where certain floors are just very cold and the kids are just required to generally wear winter jackets during the school year.
The homes usually have the other issue.
Well, it's why we continue our facilities review and come to you with off-cycle requests to repair issues.
Other questions or comments? So I think the lack of analytical transparency on this is just consistent with my other comments, but it's not so much that we would have to table this in order to get that additional information. Are you in concurrence with that, Jim?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we can bring this to a vote. Does anybody have any other comments or questions before we do that?
Just a small comment.
Please.
More is better. I mean, kind of echo what you said, just the more stuff you throw in, the better it is for us.
Okay.
That's right, so we want to have this future conferences. My God, they provide so much clarity and analytical data, I just can't take it anymore. Something like that.
I will look for that goal next time we come before you.
Okay, we will look forward to providing that comment. Okay, motion to approve the special appropriation, $355,000 for the purpose of this electrical upgrade project for the elementary schools.
Sure.
Paul, second. Senator. All in favor? Okay, thank you. We appreciate your patience as we work through this, and good luck with the project.
Thank you for your support.
That first few minutes.
I prepared this evening, but I wasn't sure what it's not animal.
No, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Got to the right outcome, I hope.
Thank you.
Got to the right outcome, I hope. In terms of approving? No, we approve.
Yeah, right, but I think that.
Thank you.
All right, well, appreciate your comment. Thank you.
Was that the email that I sent it?
Sean, here's a piece for you guys.
Okay, why don't we move along, and let's pick up the police department. So you guys want to talk about that, Ed or Chief?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Actually, yeah.
I think that mic's working, I don't know.
Ed, do you need some help?
Ray spotting in case it gets
Okay, thanks for coming this evening, we appreciate it, and happy to consider this.
Thank you very much for having me. Ed Gentile, Director of Public Works, here with Chief Osborne, Darien Police Department. In front of you, you have a request for a transfer of $25,000 to address some issues that have been plaguing the Darien Police Department now for, I'd say, approximately 3 or 4 years, but from what I understand, they go on before I started here too. So, and they've become even increasingly worse over this past year through the summertime. I'll get into some more of the specifics, but basically we're having issues with humidity, poor building circulation, poor building pressurization, if you will, draft issues. We did have a couple mold issues. Chief Osborne will speak on that a little bit to you, but the part that's kind of concerning is it's a brand new building. I consider 6, 7 years brand new. And they did a complete strip down of that building, put a new skin on it, on the old, built new addition in the back, put in new mechanicals and so on. And we've spent quite a bit of time over there the last 2.5, 3 years trying to rectify some of the issues that I've spoken about. But we do have a preventive maintenance program. We do have a company that does come down and do that for us, but I think we're at the point now where their expertise and what we've been trying to do with tinkering or changing or modifications has led us to this situation where I need to get past, as I said to Ray earlier, the general practitioner, and I need to get a specialist now. I need somebody to come in here and just dissect this building and diagnose what's wrong with it and come up with some solutions for us and some numbers to go with it and give us some choices moving forward. I don't see the Darien Police Department moving out of that building anytime soon. And I feel now is the opportune time before we run into a situation where we get so deep into a problem that it is exponentially cost prohibitive to address it quickly. So I'm going to just let Ray speak a little bit about some of the things he's involved in over there, and then I'll just give you an idea of what we plan to do with this transfer.
Thanks. First, I really want to thank Ed for getting involved in this project with us. This past summer, things really came to a head over there with the humidity issues, the water dripping through the ceilings from condensation, dripping down on computers, dripping down on officers as they're typing reports. In the middle of the summer, it's freezing in the communications area to where the dispatchers are wearing coats. And it's 80 degrees in the report room, or 80, 85 degrees in the report room. It's a very, very nice facility. It's the HVAC system is just not running right, and we don't know why. It's well beyond my expertise. So I reached out to Ed, and Ed made these suggestions, and I'm totally on board with it. We've got some mold issues. We've had to have an air quality study done at the request of the Police Association. I was on board with that just because of all the mold that we found. So I think the plan that Ed has laid out for us is really, really solid, and we're hoping you agree.
Let me, John, if I may comment. So I have had, I think I've covered the police department for 7 or 8 years, something like that. So I knew, well, we didn't know this would be an issue when we opened the building, that's for sure. But it wasn't soon after that we had some issues. They were on the west side of the building, where we actually had to redo some of the windows. And I'm not sure where the mold is, but the point is that immediately, like within the first year, those issues were apparent. And I think we've all kind of lived with it. It's technically the smartest building that we built in town. So it's got a lot of digital controls in that room upstairs. It's quite remarkable. So candidly, it's disappointing.
Right.
But I know what you're trying to do, and if it outstrips your expertise, let's get it done. It's just disappointing, and we need to really get our arms around it. Because I think we've got potentially a deterioration situation in the building in terms of some of the lifetime of that building that we were planning for a lot longer. So we've got to get at it.
Agreed.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So is this effort going to be really a diagnostic in terms of why this is happening? Was it a design issue, an equipment issue, something that happened after the building, sort of after it was constructed, that it was fine when the building was built? All of that, I'm assuming that'll all be revealed as part of this effort?
That's the goal.
Okay.
Excellent questions. Well over my head, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what's the plan for identifying the right specialist to?
Well, that's where a lot of my experience networking here in this local area down here comes to the forefront, if you will. I've been in the municipal government, building new buildings, retrofitting old buildings since 2000. I have plenty of contacts with public works directors throughout Fairfield County and up as far as New Milford. So I reached out to a lot of them. The one area that seemed to have the same type of issues in quite a few of their buildings was Stanford. Just so happened I happened to work there previously, so I reached out.
I'm sorry, you said some of the same issues?
They had to go back in and what do you call retro commissioning of the building. They go back in and diagnose They make recommendations, and they go and implement those recommendations to better the environment and the use of the HVAC. Excuse me. So I contacted them. And this company's name came up a couple times with regards to recent work that was done in that location. It also, I say he, the consultant I'm speaking of is SES, Sustainable Engineering Solutions. They're out of Berlin. This gentleman, Ernie Laus, he is the principal, came highly recommended from Stanford and from Eversource. And let me backtrack a little bit into what Eversource was trying to do with us. About 1.5 years ago, I believe, they asked to come in and what they call recommission the building, which is, hey, let's go back in and find some energy efficiency stuff to do. But we started to have more problems with the HVAC, so I wasn't willing to jump in to try to do energy efficiency until I had the HVAC system properly diagnosed and working for us. So we put the halt on that process. But during the process, they gave us 3 names. This gentleman's name came up first. Is one of the companies that we should use to do the work. That whole process, though, would have been a split in cost. Let's say if it was $20,000, Eversource would have paid 10, we would have paid 10, and they would also support us with some of the capital improvements that would need to be made in the building. It's a way to save energy, and it's one of their programs that they're pushing right now. So I did stop that. But I called this gentleman. I had him come down and meet the chief, meet our facilities mechanic. We met over there with Captain Anderson also, who has been dealing with this, I think, from day one also, and myself. And we talked about what our issues were. And he spent a couple hours with his assistant going through the building and came up with a proposal that I went through. And it looks to me is what we need to do over there with far as investigation, putting together a report, diagnosing problems, and then coming up with some solutions, not just one, but multiple solutions. There's multiple answers to issues over there that could be inexpensive to implement, but not long-lasting, or something that could cost a little bit more, but stay with the life of the building. And those are the things we need to look at. And this report he's going to produce, it should take him about 4 months to do. We'll have a planning and investigation phase and a reporting phase. And part of that reporting phase, I asked him to put together a cost estimate of the improvements that he's recommending for the building. I think that's important. I think it's important to me going forward, knowing what kind of dollars we're looking to put into this building. I know it's important to you folks, the bottom line of what we're spending on a building and what we're going to get back in return. You know, is it going to be fixed? Or are we going to be talking about this 3 years from now again? I do not want to come in front of you folks again looking to do this another time.
Ed or Ray, well, again, I don't want to spend extra money, but anytime you have something like this, to the extent that there are other issues you have with the building or things that are not working well that are not HVAC related, right, that could reasonably be addressed as part of this. Have you given thought to that as well? I mean, it would be great to think about kind of the full range of issues you might have and say, okay, we're going to address this. We might as well get all of this done just so that, again, you get the building in shape where you don't have something that's maybe impairing your work or making life miserable for your officers and staff that are in the building.
I can tell you, as part of my discussion with Ernie, was not just to focus on HVAC.
Okay.
But understanding that the majority of our money and our maintenance dollars are spent on that system over there right now. But there is electricity. You can always look at lights. I mean, they were done with LEDs, but there's motion sensors in the rooms. I think a perfect example is we have 2 detective rooms back to back. They're heating and cooling systems. They do the same rooms, but they work in off hours. So one guy has it really comfortable, the other guy has it either really cold or really hot. It's one of those systems where it's not working towards the use of the building and the use of the rooms, and they need to be knocked down to those sections. I had mentioned to the Board of Selectmen that during actually the last 2 or 3 years ago, the use of natural gas during the summertime was more expensive than actually electricity to run the air conditioning. Now, in speaking with Ernie, there are systems out there that do dehumidification through that process, but not to that extent. And as Ray has explained to you today, we had water coming through the ductwork and coming through the grills, and that's just not acceptable.
Yeah, anyway, I would just encourage you that when you're looking at this, to make sure that if there's anything on your list that's outside of this that says, okay, we're thinking about this, let's try to cover all of that, or at least make sure you have had a chance to consider it. I'd encourage you to be expansive and try to cover everything we or the Board of Selectmen or even you may decide not to address them, but at least put them on the list where you can say, yes, we looked at them and decided yes or no whether to do it.
I think we're going to produce a full menu of what needs to be done over there and prioritize those in going forward. And though we may not do it immediately, they'll be looking forward to doing something in the future to provide that building some longevity.
Okay. Other questions?
This company, when you use SES, can they actually perform the work and make the improvements?
I wouldn't want to do that, and I don't think they do, first of all, and I don't think I want to bring I'm going to want to bid this out. And I think that's the proper approach to get a company in here that actually, when they're done with the system, it can be certified and commissioned. It doesn't mean we wouldn't use or wouldn't allow the company that's doing our PMPs to bid on it. They're a company that we've used here to do solar. They're a company that I use to do the DPW garage. So I do want to put it out on the street to see if we can get it at the price. But SES, I don't believe, does the physical construction and installation of that.
Okay. Other questions?
Just two quick things. Chief, kind of echoing what Jamie said, I think I've been on the police and fire for 3 years. Yeah, it feels like this has been an ongoing issue. I think at one point there was one of your officers that was the go-to guy trying to fix everything.
Oh, yeah.
And then second, just really quick, it says 3 to 4 months to complete, and the cost is $25. Are they once a week? And it sounds like it's like they're. I would expect the time frame to be a little shorter, but are they full-time doing this? Because it's just the timing to me is like a bit odd.
I had this discussion with Ernie, and what I'd like to see him do is experience this building during the winter and get a little flavor for it when it starts to warm up and we're using the AC, because I think that is going to give him a ton of information on how to address the issues over there. So if I put him in there in the wintertime and he doesn't see I mean, you don't have to physically see it, but he doesn't see how the system is running, I don't think you're going to get the full effect.
Cool. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Terrific.
That makes sense.
Anything else? Other questions? Okay, motion to approve. Jamie, second. Rob, all in favor? Okay, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Okay, Jennifer Bonse.
Yes, we are going to be planning to go out for a bond sale, so I wanted to initiate the discussion with you, and we have Mark Chapman, our financial advisor, here. He's put together 3 scenarios. I requested these 3 based on the conversation the last time we went out to bond, looking at kind of a normal way that we have been doing it in the past with first principal payment at 12 months, and looking at options of pushing out the first principal payment, deferring it as long as possible, level debt versus level principal, to give us a few options of where we want to go on this. But if you look at page 2 of each of the scenarios, as well as the summary, it shows you what projects we're looking to issue for. It'd be the remainder of the DPW garage, the sewer expansion project that was approved quite a while ago, and the remainder of the cafeteria duct bank project, and then 3 projects that are just getting underway: the town hall generator, homeschool roof, and the high school turf baseball field. We would be looking to fully issue for those authorizations.
And does this clean up all the cash deficits in the projects that are closed
It
out?
does. It keeps us right on top of all of that.
Okay. Mark, thank you for coming. We appreciate it, as always. So I know I've looked at this. Jim, you've looked at all this. Do you want to make any comments? Or?
Yeah, I guess, in terms of, it looks like, in my opinion, scenario 3 was the one that kind of follows what we did in the last bond deal.
Exactly.
So we're deferring principal as long as we can. I know you ran it at 36 months. I know sometimes it might only be 30 months. It can't be any longer than 36 months.
But that's in the spirit of level debt service, right?
Yeah,
That's
so
the purpose of all that.
Deferring the first principal payment for 2 years, making the first payment in 3 years,
Yep.
and then level principal and interest after that for 20 years.
Correct. So I think when I looked at that and I looked at sort of the spike that it eliminates in 2021, 22, 23-ish, what it's doing is it's reducing our debt service as a percentage of our actual budget by anywhere from 40 to like 100 basis points. And so kind of smoothing that out, I just think gives us more flexibility, I think, in terms of dealing with budgeting going forward. We saw this like 2 or 3 years ago where we had sort of a spike in those principal payments. And so my recommendation would be 3. I guess the only question I wanted to point out, obviously, if we defer principal, we're paying a little bit more interest on it. Interest rates are still at relatively low levels right here. And I guess my only question, I wasn't sure if you, just to kind of quantify how much further we're pushing under debt, do you know like the average life of the whole 54 million is in scenario 1, 2, and 3, just so we can kind of quantify
Yeah, I
it?
can kind of ballpark it. I got the email as I was driving. So for a level principal, it's typically about 10.5-year average life. You defer, so scenario 2, you defer it for 2 years and then do level principal. You get to about 12 years of average life. And then when we defer 2 years and go level principal and interest, now we're actually, the scenario 2 was, I have this book. Is that level principal and interest?
12 months level debt.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're right around 12 years for scenario 2. You get to scenario 3, we're right around 14, shy of 14 years of average life. And that's what the uptick in the interest rate. And I think one of the questions was, is 10 basis points too much? Depends which part of the curve. So some parts it was maybe 13 basis points and some it was 8. So I kind of came up with 10. It was just easier when I was running the numbers. I think the overall interest rate was conservative as well. I think we're below 3% right now. As you know, everyone saw what happened in December. And you know, right now the market is trying to catch up and see what's really going on. This was kind of, last week was kind of the first full week in the market as everyone's coming back after the holidays. So now we're kind of in a supply and demand thing that's going on right now. But I think I'm conservative in some of the interest rates we have in here.
Does the decision to more aggressively defer the principal reduce our flexibility in any way in terms of future borrowings? Should something come up, and does it impair in any way our perception by the ratings agencies? Is there any negative to this, other than these being options to level our cash flow?
I mean, I think you're planning. We're looking at this. I mean, you're not locked into the next 3 bond issues at doing it that way. Mm-hmm. You're saying this is our plan today as we know it. If things change and the numbers aren't as big, if they're not $20 million or some assumed projects and they're smaller or something else is going on, you always have the flexibility of changing that strategy. I wouldn't personally recommend to always go level, deferring it as much and deferring it, because then eventually you'll have level debt service and you'll just continue to layer on top of it. But I think the way your debt service is now, scenario 3 does solve that. But as you mentioned, so the first 10 years it helps you, the second 10 years that's where you start paying for it. Mm-hmm. So it is added cost, but I think where you have to ultimately make the decision is you serve 2 masters. It's the added expense over the 23 years, 24 years, versus what does it help us in the short term from a budgetary perspective. Yeah,
my general sense is that I think scenario 3 is okay. If you look at scenario 1, which is the more aggressive principal repayment scenario. I mean, there's 3 years where we are higher debt service than what we have right now. And in the years 2 and 3 of that higher debt service, it's $1 million and $1.5 million higher than it would have been otherwise. Scenario 3 provides for level debt service, and I actually think that's okay as well, because if you look at this scenario, it actually has built in the debt that we would have to take on if we do Oxbridge, which we anticipate. And if you also think about things in the broader scheme, that my guess is that's the only major capital project we're certainly going to have probably for the next 5 years. It'll be all consuming, and I don't really see where else we would be spending money at that level and be required to borrow substantial sums. And after that period, it starts to get us back out to where we're dropping to $9 and $8 million in annual debt service. And if something did come up at that point, you know what, we'd have not only the debt capacity, obviously, but we'd have some room in our principal and debt, principal and interest budget, if you will, to layer in some additional debt if something comes up that we have to pursue that. So that's why, I mean, as a general matter, I don't like deferring principal, but in the spirit of trying to keep this level, especially when we face the prospect of unknown state requirements that may impact our budget, I just think it's prudent for helping our taxpayers manage their lives to, in this case, defer principal aggressively to where we maintain that sort of level debt service. Unless you disagree.
Let me comment, Mark. This is a really great discussion, and I think your guidance over the years largely is to be aware of these things, but to deliver the best true interest cost you could on each issue, and you've done that. You've served us well.
I would echo that. I really appreciate your
We've had a great discussion the last year. I mean, Jim is largely leading us on this thing, but we've had a great discussion as a board around what is our long-term indebtedness policy. What are those metrics that matter? How do we want to adhere to that? I mean, just kind of conversation stuff,
right?
And
versus
coming up with
$100 million number. Right?
Well, we dumbed it down after we got through with it. We're not sure $100 million is anything but arbitrary, to be frank with you, because of our fiscal capacity being, relatively speaking, unlimited. You're in the land of plenty here, Mark. Right. Unlimited, I said. So the question is, with the interest rate environment we're in and the opportunity we have, what are the trade-offs in terms of the things that would be the key pillars that we've had? I think we've all said, largely, that if we could, debt as a percentage of the operating budget is a leading pillar. And the reason I want to comment on this is we've got really great data here that you've provided us to play with the pillars that we identified over the last year and come up with a really rational decision. If I may, guys, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not sure we've ever quite had this moment in time to say we knew what our pillars are, we have supporting documentation here, and we've got the guy to drive the locomotive into the market on supply and demand to get us the best TIC. It's kind of a cool thing to see. So, but I do think debt as a percentage of the operating budget is a driver. You're addressing that.
Yeah.
I'll just make one more comment, because I see it as a really important moment, because I'm going to say it to the Board of Education, and they're going to, of course, think I'm, some kind of drunken sailor. We should be driving every possible hard asset into our view for renovation, rehabilitation. We should be doing all of that as much as we can accelerate it and pushing it forward. And that we only have Oxbridge as a significant hard asset to, frankly, rebuild. I'm saying this openly because for those people that are watching, we're going to commend the Board of Education to really revisit that. I've had this refrain to them for 4 or 5 years, and we really haven't pushed projects forward. So, and it's not just with the interest rate environment. It's just, I think we have an opportunity to do something to keep these hard assets at a higher level. So anyway, I'm watching this thing work out tonight, and it's kind of nice to see that it all works.
Yeah, it is. Thank you. Other comments? Diana.
I guess just one question in terms of, Are there any other markets that we should be looking at beyond just kind of traditional bond sale versus sort of bank qualified? Like, is the bank qualified market something that we should be considering for deals like this? Are we eligible based on how much we, I think it's based on how much we issue?
The first issue will be under 10 million. It's still the number.
It has to be under 10 though, right?
Under 10. It's not just bonding. Tax exempt leases, any of those things count towards that number. So one of the things bond counsel will ask is, so if we had a $9.9 million sale, they'll say, are there any leases that you have that are tax exempt that get you over the 10 million? So that the 10 million is the number. With the change in the tax code, it really hasn't worked itself through at where everyone's figured it out. The benefit is not as great as it had been 2 years ago. The banks don't see the benefit in tying up the money with that. I tend to tell folks, don't delay projects for the sake of keeping it under 10 million. Even though you're saying, we don't want to chase, we're not chasing the market, so to speak. I wouldn't create projects either, kind of like we're in business for a long time, and meaning the town, and as they come along, we finance them or pay for in cash. So the bank qualification, right now we're seeing on the long end, it's probably 10 to 15 basis points. When you get beyond 10 years, you're really seeing the benefit of that. But right now, supply is really driving this market, or keeping the interest rates low. The market last year was off 26% in the municipal market. Thanks
Volume?
Volume's down.
Really?
Well, there's no more advanced refundings because of the tax code, so that pulled a lot of money out of the market. Except the last couple of weeks, or even I think it was just last week, there has been a lot of outflows in the market from the funds, but last week was a big inflow. Personally, I don't like it when the bond market is so volatile. It's supposed to be boring, and it's not supposed to be stock market-esque. But it seems to be a little bit more volatile. There's a backlog and some data that's supposed to be released because of the shutdown, and who knows what happens when that information comes pouring out, if it's what it's gonna do to the 10-year, which the market's kind of the muni market's been following the 10-year. Sometimes it bifurcates from that, but of late it's been following that.
So in terms of timing on this, what's the expected?
Well, we talked about that this afternoon. I say comfortable because I know we're getting pulled in directions with budgets and things like that. We easily come to market in March, I think was
mid-March.
March and close by April, so you'd have the funds by April. In these assumptions, I did assume one more Fed rate increase, but that rate increase, they don't funnel through the entire curve. It really impacts the short end for the most part.
He's not going to do it anyway. We'll see.
I don't. They're talking they might do cuts this year. I mean, it's amazing what 1 month will do to the sentiment of the dot points and all that. It's interesting in my life, in my boring little municipal market life.
A little excitement once in a while.
Yeah, right.
Not a bad thing. Any other comments?
Yes. When I was on the board several years ago, we issued bonds that had calls on them. Mm-hmm. Can you issue callable bonds anymore?
Oh, absolutely. And actually, thanks to the urging of previous boards, when I first started, you were I think the first community we started doing a real short call, 5-year call, and we've continued to do that practice with the higher rated credits in the state that we represent, because of getting rid of the advanced call. I mean, we certainly encourage you to do that. And we will continue to push the market in regards to having currently callable bonds.
How much of a premium do we have to pay?
I knew that was going to be your next question. and it honestly depends in the market the day. it's maybe 10 basis points. It depends on what analyst you're talking to. If you're talking to an underwriter, he's going to tell you it's a higher number because he doesn't want callable bonds.
Yeah.
If you're talking to us who represent the clients, we're saying it's not as much because we want to give you the largest amount of flexibility moving forward.
Is there general consensus that the call option is worth as much today as it was, you know, when you could do advance refundings? I mean, how are issuers generally thinking about that?
I think they're understanding that it's needed. I mean, we all got a little comfortable in the sense that we can refund bonds at any time, right? So advanced refunding, and it didn't matter. And there was the last 5-6 years we were getting refundings depending on when you issued the original bonds, you know, up to 10% savings and, you know, some crazy numbers. Now, when they become current refundings, there's not as many bonds, there's smaller bond issues. Cost of issuance eats into that. But I think they're understanding the fact that it's not necessarily always about savings. It's about, I don't think Darien would do that, but it gives them flexibility to potentially, you know, some of the larger cities where they had to restructure. You know, they don't have to do taxable advance refundings because they thought that they had to do 10-year calls because that's what they were told. You know, you have to, in our opinion, you weigh all the options, you give the boards the information, and then they ultimately make the decision. It's not my job to make the decision for you. It's just to give you the options.
Do you think it's probably, what, 10 to 15 basis points now?
Yeah, I mean...
in 10 to 20 years?
Yeah, over the term of the issue. I've looked at it and I've said, okay, this deal has a 10-year call, this deal has a 5-year call. I've looked at them and there hasn't been any difference. I've looked at them and sometimes there is. It could be the day, it could be some underlying credit issues with one of them, because it's hard to measure, you know, unless it's two exact same credits, same average life, same day in the market. It's really hard to weigh that. I think the experts would say it's 10 or 15, and they have a way of quantifying. They have these models that can quantify call options, and they're willing to pay for them and things like that. Beyond my analytical skills.
Okay. Other questions? Jennifer, do we need to vote on third scenario, or what?
Nope, just your guidance that that's the desire of the board for us to pursue that structure.
Certainly the way I think we should go.
And then we'll, at your February meeting, bring the actual resolution
Okay.
to Sal.
All right, Mark, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Outstanding paragraph. Best we've ever done with any of these discussions. Really great.
Yeah, got a lot of help. Mr. Davis.
I don't know if I want to come up today based upon how the other speakers have
No.
done so much.
We're harmed.
I can go back home and get some additional data.
At this hour, we may need some libations or something to get through this discussion. So
I have another comment at the end.
we appreciate you coming by. Just as a refresher, Jack has been working with the F&B on taking a look at various town funds that are sitting in various accounts that have come from various sources, and it has been an effort to both clean that up, understand what we have and clean it up, but also prescribe some policy changes so we don't have this sort of issue of funds floating out there in an unaccounted way going forward. So we've talked about this several times. I just wanted to publicly thank you for this effort and all members of F&B for spending time on this. It's real valuable, and we appreciate it.
I do want to remind people that this really did start with the summer conversation that we had, because you were looking at policies associated with the general fund being committed, uncommitted, and therefore it fell through. We spoke to Jen. Jen has been a very important part of the working group that has been together. I'm not going to read this. I'm going to go through this real quickly, because I'm assuming people have read it
For which we are
before.
genuinely grateful.
We established the working group. Some of the things we didn't do, we did not look at the police false alarm fund, which I now owe $200 on, and the fire false alarm fund, or the RFNRE fund. We based our review ultimately on how we did things on 3 basic categories: active operating funds, special purpose funds, and gifts and donations. And within that group, we allocated it between active, not active, but original purpose may still be relevant, and inactive. The approach to addressing the funds were basically along this line. If it was an operating fund, there's no action to be taken. You're pretty much using it. Those funds whose source was an appropriation and no longer active, approvals by the government bodies that approve that appropriation. So there'll be one that will require Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and the RTM. There are others that are just going to be the Board of Finance and the RTM, and yet there's others that we believe are solely within the purview of the Board of Finance. Not even going to cover the active funds with the, because there's no reason to. Some active special purpose funds are the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which has some money committed to Old Town Halls. Land Purchase Option Fund, which had some of those funds used when we purchased the Hecker property to pay for about $2,000 of which. Why it isn't zeroed out with the Oxbridge Hunt Club purchase, I don't understand. It's not a lot, but it could have easily been wiped out. Again, it's budget time, and talking about the police and fire alarm, false alarm funds, although they are different, is like discussing the library budget, if you want to cut it. And I'm not willing to crucify myself yet. Town has an inactive special purpose fund where the original purpose may still be relevant. The special ed education fund has $100,000 in it. At one time it had $250,000. $150,000 was used during the Murray Stegelman timeframe. It was decided not to refund it. This is one of those funds that what the Board of Finance wants to do with it is a discussion within the Board of Finance. While I may have opinions, I'm not giving them. And we just suggest you discuss and decide what you want to do with it. Either close it, fund it, decide, if you want to fund it, decide what the level is. There were 3 special purpose committed general fund balances which are no longer active. The Animal Control Fund, which was created through licensing fees. The Waste Disposal Reserve Fund, created to cover waste disposal fees. And Waste Management Funds, created to support the town's solid waste operations. Haven't been used since 2013, 2000, and 2009. Our recommendation is to close those funds. Since these were set up through appropriations in the budget, this would require Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and then the RTM. We did, Mike, who worked on this, was kind enough to set up a resolution to cover these with Jen. I have not passed it on to Wayne for his review, simply because, you know, I'm waiting for what the outcome is from this body. I have spoken on our working with all things on Wayne, and by the way, this presentation was also sent to Jamie and Kate so that they were knowledgeable of what was going on. As I mentioned, our recommendation is for the 3 bodies to do it. It's approximately $195,000. and this would return them to uncommitted general fund funds. The next one, and this one's kind of interesting. The Board of Finance established the Superstorm Sandy Revenue Fund in 2013, where all related claims and transactions would now be put. There's a couple things about this. First of all, it's interesting that John actually on the Board of Finance moved the motion, because I went back to minutes, and I, acting as vice chair of F&B, actually reported on this when we moved the money over.
Who was chairman of F&B at that time?
That guy.
Mr. Palin.
So all guilty parties are present. That's
You
what
got it. A couple things. The town was proper in moving a fund to capture all the expenses and the future revenues coming in. But this is a special fund, and funds could have deficit balances. And while it was going over a fiscal year, we really don't have to fund this in the future. Should this occur again, we could keep it in deficit until all of the claims, insurances are finalized, and then do a single movement to clean out that fund. So I think in conversation with Jen, we agreed that we wouldn't be doing interim funding that crossed a fiscal year should this occur again. So that's one thing that we've learned from that. In the interim, there's about $215,000 still sitting in that fund. So since it was only approved by the Board of Finance and the RTM, we have a resolution that we will pass to Wayne with the recommendation, hopefully we might even be able to do it in the February meeting or no later than March, to return those to the general fund, which is where the appropriation came from. There were 2 town gift donation contribution funds that are active. Social Services Gift Fund and Senior Center Gift Fund. I actually had an opportunity to sit down with the new Social Services Director, if that's the right term. And we have, because there's been changes in management, we're going to see this in the Park and Rec as well. In reality, when we get a gift, there's 2 things. First of all, we're supposed to have a subsidiary ledger that says John Joe gave a gift to be used for seniors. We're supposed to track that. We're not. So for the ones that are in there, we can back up on social services some of those accounts because she does maintain if it was used for back to school, what they didn't spend they might use. But for the others, we may just have to guess. I'm not questioning, there's nothing nefarious that went on here. It's just bad accounting. But the senior center, I haven't had that conversation to be able to know whether or not they're tracking. And so you're going to see one of our recommendations is that the actual subsidiary accounting now becomes part of the quarterly management review, so that we know that this is being done. There were 3 funds that have been inactive but remain relevant. And some of this has had, that I had to go back to other people who have been associated. When Powell's play area was done, the 5013C, if that's the right thing, raised more money than they needed. And they didn't want to keep their organization going, so they gave it over to the town saying, anything for the Cherry Lawn Park in the future, the Park and Rec director can use. I know that only because we were able to track down the people who are associated with the gift. However, we can't find, we actually have a new Park and Rec director, and that information was not given to them. And so we spoke, and I do believe that there is some request, it's about $30,000, that they want to do to improve the Cherry Lawn Park, and so that we're recommending we take from here first. I think the total project may be coming in, we'll see in the budget cycle, about $40,000, $50,000. So this greatly reduces that. There are two other weed beach gift funds where, again, spreadsheets aren't there. And this brings in two things that have happened. One, Jen and Kate took on because we have the bicentennial coming and people are going to be making contributions to town for the bicentennial. And if we don't spend all those funds, it's sitting in a bicentennial fund. And by the way, we only have one bicentennial. So what do we do with the excess funds? So a new policy.
I don't want to keep any funds outstanding for that long.
Forever. So a new policy that has been reviewed by Wayne is that, and Jen, I'm going to ask you to say this better than I am going to. So can you explain what the new policy is?
So previously, we had a donation letter that would go out to donors and say, your donation, thank you for your donation, it may be tax deductible, speak with your tax professional kind of a thing. Keeping that same basic idea, thanking for the donation, indicating what purpose it was for, it may be tax deductible, but also tacking on a statement to the effect of every effort will be made to fully expend your fund for the purpose for which it was donated, but when the project is complete, if funds remain, they will become part of the they will move over to the general operations of the town. So that we're informing the donor that we will make every effort to fully expend their dollars, but in the event that something is not expended and the project is complete, it gives us the right to just move it over and not end up with these little scraps hanging out there.
That's typical in donor language, so I think that's a smart thing to do.
Yeah, agreed.
And that doesn't deter them if they know that they donated $100 and they took an exemption for 100 and 10 of it could be used for a sort of non-charitable?
Well, it's still a donation to the town.
It's still a donation to the town.
So all donations to the town are considered tax exempt?
Yeah.
It would just be a question
Speak
of
with your
honoring a
tax
restriction.
Please speak with your tax professional about
Yes.
that.
And Jim, I'll give you the perfect example. We get often, I want to have a bench in, as opposed to a statue for Jack Davis.
Shrine,
sorry, which was far too much money. We could have done it for $2 million. We get a donation for $1,500 for a park bench in honor of my father. And it costs $1,349. To track that, of whether or not we're using that for future maintenance on that bench, whatever that might be, is costing us more than the $100 that is left over. So it's just better to say, we did the best we can to spend it, we got the bench, move those funds away. And that actually deals with the next two Weed Beach gift funds. Documentation cannot be located for Weed Beach amenities. I'm assuming that most of these are leftover funds from closed projects. And in conversation with Jen, I believe the suggestion is to move the two funds into a single fund and then use it for future amenities at Weed Beach as the Board of...
Actually, I will say that changed through our budget discussions. So the idea now is the Park and Rec is requesting a project that exceeds what is in here, more than double. And so what we're recommending in the budget is to take these two and contribute, have it come in as a contribution into the reserve for capital non-recurring to support that one project at Weed Beach.
Actually, I don't perceive that to be a change. I perceive that to be using it, which is better. The next one is a real interesting one. It's the Sarah Wilson Trust Fund that was established prior to 1999 when the town moved to Munis. I went back to 1980s to look at if this was ever mentioned. for both the Beautification Commission, the Board of Selectmen, and it was interesting to hear that in the 1990s, the Board of Selectmen are saying, oh, we don't have any funds for our cemeteries. But in our financial statements for a real long time, this was contributed to maintain the town cemeteries. By the way, we also checked death records, birth records, going back quite a while with Donna to see if we could find Sarah Wilson, and we could not. The Historical Society, which through John's Graces also did an inquiry, and they have no knowledge of a Sarah Wilson. So the concept, it's about $9,100, is to move that to be used in the future. But as Jen, again, can better articulate than I can, it's not going to be used in 1 year. There's a capacity of what they can do at any one time. So it may take us a little while to get it into fully used, only because there's only so many projects they can do at one time in reality. And if I'm not mistaken,
the budget every year, so.
did you want to move that into the capital?
No, because of the timing and
Okay.
we would have them spend directly from this fund.
Okay,
and drop
super,
down.
done.
So then when we're reviewing that expense for the cemeteries this year, we should just
You
make sure
probably
it
won't
comes
even
out of
see
this
it in there.
fund. There you go.
By the way, all the funds I'm basically talking about now, with the exception of one, is really purely the purview of the Board of Finance. And so it does not have to go to the legislative body, which is great. There's balances in the Firefighters Memorial Fund and the Veterans Memorial Fund are residual amounts from the statues that exist out there, for money that came in after they bought the statue or what they didn't use. And we're just suggesting that those balances be transferred for use to the Monuments Commission for future projects. Next one's interesting because I was requesting from Wayne on this last fund, the next one, Harold Dean Fund, to say whether or not, if we can't identify the person or contact them, can we put a notice in the newspaper for 30 days? If you have any comments, come back to us, and that would be the cost, and then we could deal with the Harold Dean Trust Fund. To which both Donna and Wayne said, you don't know who Harold Dean is? And I said, if I did, I wouldn't be asking to put something in the newspaper. Apparently, Judge Harold Dean is a longtime resident of Darien. He was a Superior Court judge, retired, and was a very big hockey fan. And so we have $1,500, you'll love this, for hockey trophies that have been around for a while. Now, it's interesting because I went on to see what hockey trophies exist, and I could buy about 7 Stanley Cups for that price. So we have to figure out what to do with it. Wayne happened to tell me that I asked if we knew how to get in touch, and it turns out that we both knew a mutual attorney who gave me Mr. Dean's telephone number. I've been waiting for authorization to call to see what Miss Judge Dean wishes to do with his $1,500. Whether or not we set it up as a scholarship, whether or not we get trophies, or what we do with it, or whether or not he's going to grant something else.
We fervently await the outcome of that call.
What?
We fervently await the outcome.
I'm sure we do.
Or give it to the EYHA in town, the Darien Youth Hockey Association, they can buy some trophies with it.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Okay, that's, I was going to speak to you anyhow, because I don't even know what to approach. We can do a Jones
Yeah,
call.
there's plenty
Super.
of youth hockey
Yeah,
organizations
they
that would
love
benefit
the
from that.
gift, and they would.
And I'd love to get rid of it.
Good.
And we clear it out. Okay.
What's next?
Okay. Working group has a balance on the old original stadium field for about $13.50. Jen and I discussed this. We rebuilt the stadium field. So what we're going to do is reopen that project, transfer the $13.50 back into that project, close out that project, and transfer the $13.50 into a capital contingency. So that one's gone. That you guys have to authorize Jen to do, sorry. So what are some of our action items that we've discussed? Implement a new gift donation contribution policy. You've heard that that's already done. Close animal control, waste disposal reserve, waste management goes into general fund. Close Superstorm Sandy, gone. Stadium fund goes to capital. Use Park Pals as part of the new Cherry Lawn playground renovation. Merge the Weed Beach and obviously use them for projects appropriately. Board of Finance discuss the reserve fund, reconstruct subsidiary ledgers, or at least do some part of it, and I'm more than willing to work with the senior center and the social services. I've done forensic accounting in my past life, among other things. Transfer balances from the firefighters, veterans to the monuments fund. But here's where some of the real rubber meets the road. Recently, when we were doing the blight ordinance, I fought against setting up a separate fund for that. And with the support of Kate and Jen, we were able to ensure that no new funds are set up. We modified, as you see, the gift policy. We suggest that the Board of Selectmen review relevant fund balances as part of their annual budget review. I believe had they been doing this, you wouldn't have need us to do it. New periodic reports be established to the Board of Finance on these balances and what's going on with them. No different than you're doing on, here's what we spent cash and that, and I know that Jen's created certain reports, and I fully trust that Jen could have come up with something that keeps the Board of Finance, future Board of Finances, advised of what's going on. We will discuss the fire commissions, police commission, subsequent to the budget cycle, which buys us at least a little time to take a better look at that. If not already implemented, there's no reason why some of these funds shouldn't be on OpenGov, at least out there. And that's a way for creating transparency for the RTM, for them to know what exists out there. And as I already mentioned, make sure that reconciliation of the subsidiary ledgers are done on a at least quarterly basis during the management review at the Board of Selectmen. So that's basically our recommendations. We'll get the resolutions together with Wayne and can move forward on that.
I think this is terrific. Again, thank you for taking this initiative. Hugely helpful to get this cleaned up in the spirit of good government and hygiene. So we'll await your resolutions on that, and I'm assuming there'll be a sort of formal list of things that you'd like in terms of a resolution, a vote, a transfer,
Yeah, we'll
all
put
those
together a
things.
whole
So when we
package
put that
deal.
together, we can
Yeah.
run through and take those appropriate actions.
I think Jen and I approach, and your approach at the same thing, is we want to do this all at one time as opposed to piecemealing. So it gets done, goes through. I can handle explanations to the RTM.
Great.
I did want to close on one note, though. And I'm going to be real cautious, and I know this isn't going to come out right. So I'm going to say it anyhow, and you can just know that I'm blunt. We just had a conversation on transparency. This is the board that I get no information from. I get full packets from the Board of Selectmen. I get full packets from the Board of Ed on anyone that's going on in their meetings. And I was out of town last week, And I look here, and you guys know that I'm really interested in debit and credit card draft policies, which you could talking tonight, and I haven't even seen a draft of it. So you're going to be talking, and I don't know what the document says.
So they're not in there because I'm going to table it. We're not ready. So
Yeah,
not to worry.
Okay.
There won't be any discussion of all that until we actually have draft.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, it would be nice that some of the packets that you guys are getting, like, you know, there was just a discussion on bond, and Bert here, that's what he did for a living, and, I mean, for me, bonds are for dummies, so I don't understand this. I always relied on Mr. Palin, which is true. So, but having somebody like Bert, you know, I could pass it to him and just say, you know, educate me on what they're talking about, for nothing else. So, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks, Jack.
Like I said, we're going to table debt and credit card fee policies until later. Set interest rate for tax deferral. We do this every year. It's statutory and it's fixed in terms of what we do. Jen, unless you had any comments?
Absolutely not.
Motion to approve.
So moved.
Rob, or Paul, Rob. All in favor? 6-0. Okay. Budget process. There were a couple of things just briefly to mention about this. In your packet, there was our standard kind of Excel calendar, but on the second page, importantly, was the Board of Selectmen workshop schedule, and you can see that that's coming up with their first meeting with what I guess is the overall budget presentation to them, and then the by-department reviews following that on Tuesday and Wednesday. So two things. One is I certainly would encourage everybody, to the extent they're available, to certainly go to the presentation on Monday, January 28th, and listen to what Kate has to say about all that, and to the extent that you're available to listen to the other department proposals, and we should get that on everybody's calendars.
I find that very helpful.
That's super helpful. So here's the radical proposal that I have, which is, would we consider actually going to these meetings and not having any department meetings, and instead taking any questions that we have either following these meetings or just in general and posing them directly to Kate as an experiment?
One more time, John, don't go to.
So we're not going to, we would not go see the chief, we're not going to go to the library, we're not going to visit with fire departments, we're not going to do any of that. We're going to go to this meeting and we're going to listen to all of this, and then we'll decide. We're not going to come in and say, okay, let's schedule all of these meetings. We'll take our questions, we'll pose them to Kate, just in terms of an order of what we would do. Take our questions, pose them to Kate. If we still don't feel like we have all the answers we need, then we would go to the department heads. But in other words, we're not saying we're not going to talk to them. We're just going to say, let's put in place an order of doing things, which is listen to the Board of Selectmen presentations, catch them on tape, whatever we need to do. We'll still have budget assignments, right? But the process that we would follow is to go through all of that, maybe have some discussions amongst ourselves, but come up with our questions. But as a first step, take those questions to Kate. If we get good answers to those questions and we're done, then we're done. If not, then we still have an opportunity before we have to vote on any of this to go out and have department meetings as we see fit.
So we did that on a subset already of departments.
We've kind of done that
right?
on a subset where we actually never met with those department heads. But what I'm saying is actually adopt a universal process, if you will, that just says for all departments, we're going to start with the Board of Selectmen presentations. We'll come up with our own questions, discuss amongst ourselves, pose those to Kate, look at the answers, maybe actually have a session where Kate comes to the Board of Finance and she will have gotten the questions in advance. We have a public discussion about all that. We coordinate with F&B, and you know, this is kind of new thinking on this, and we certainly wouldn't preclude them from having department meetings if they felt it was necessary. But I think the idea is that certainly this board, and maybe F&B, we just come in and say we're going to pose all our questions to Kate, and then we're going to selectively talk to department heads only if we feel like we did not get satisfaction from the answers that we received from Kate.
And to the extent that we have enough people go to each of these meetings.
Well, keep in mind they're taped, right? So even if we're not there, I certainly will be at the one on Monday, and maybe the one on Tuesday, and then after that I'm out of the country. But In any case, they're all on tape, so I think by February, whatever the final meeting date there is, another couple of days later, we will have had a chance to review all that.
And I always
again,
watch
based
the
on our
ones that are
assignments.
assigned,
Yeah, so
where you've got your assignments as well, so.
Yeah, so, and I'll go through and massage all that, but I wanted to just throw that out for discussion to see if you all would consider having that order, just in the spirit of making the process even more efficient, because the good news is, if we get at the end and we decide to have some department meetings, there's for specific reasons, right? Because either we didn't get all our answers, or we felt that we really needed to sit down with these guys for whatever reason, but the default is to wait until we've posed the questions and heard from Kate before we do that.
Yeah. I guess, would we, if we had questions, when the budget comes out, when Kate's budget comes out and we review it, if we have questions, does it make sense to kind of feed Kate the questions right there so she can ask them during the?
During or after, right? But the idea is that all the questions go to Kate.
Yeah.
We try it. And then, again, we certainly have department meetings if we need them. But if we get answers, then that saves them time, saves everybody time.
Well, if you'd like a comment from me, let me start
Absolutely.
with hallelujah. So this only works if we're engaged. And I think we'd fall backwards if we're not fully engaged. So, you know, look at our schedules and work through these times, and for all of us, it would behoove us to be at every one of these that we can make, but at a minimum, someone should be there representing the Board of Finance, at a minimum, somebody. And if we've done that, and there are questions that come up that are just out of round, they're just invite discussion, it should be brought to the attention of the board at the next possible time.
Yeah, and
something like that, John. But it's you know, in the anti-nitpicker society of Darien that I'm in, this is, you know, long overdue.
Well, so I think that if we can do that, but to your point about participation, so in order to do this, it is going to require that in terms of assignments, I don't want to just assign sort of areas to have a budget. I'd like to assign people to go to these selectment meetings and make sure that, to your point, we've got representation there. I'd like it coordinated with F&B where maybe there's a buddy system for that. And that we try to use some of these meetings to make sure we have got all our questions answered, right? So between now and the budget meetings in March, we actually come up with the questions, we submit them to Kate, and potentially Kate comes to one or two of these meetings, or maybe she can be represented by Jen in terms of the questions that we need answered, particularly if they're all posed in advance, and kind of go from there. But again, the idea being that after all that, if we still have something we really need to cover with the department head, so be it. But my guess is there's a chance we might not have anything. It's an experiment. Jack, questions?
I agree conceptually, and in fact mentioned last year at the start of the budget process that I believe it's Kate's budget until the Board of Selectmen approve it. And therefore, and that's treating it the same way that it's the superintendent's budget until the Board of Ed approves it. So all the comments that we're making on some of the budgets that my own committee made tonight, it's really on the superintendent's budget, not on the Board of Ed. They haven't voted. They haven't fully vetted the budget themselves. So I'm all in favor of it. And, you know, sitting here we have two people who have made for years almost every meeting with Rob, and I've always found Jamie and Kate to be more than willing to open the floor, take questions, have conversations, and so a lot can be done in that session itself, which I think is very helpful to be there, because you may not even need to write the questions. Usually the questions that you're going to come up with is...
Yeah, they've already been asked right in the meeting.
Right in the meeting. And so the ones we're coming up with is, okay, I'm looking at this, and similar to what you just asked of the Board of Ed, can you really show me the data on what the overtime is and what the causes are? Which we ask almost consistently and is never presented in that budget. So
And the reality is, if we get analytical transparency, to use my earlier
right,
phrase,
from both parts.
with the Board of Selectmen budget, the reality is that we should be able to get most of our questions answered without having to bother department heads.
You got it. I'm a full believer, and I'm also not one for micromanaging. People who are elected to do a job. We're elected just to review and make sure that we concur that the taxpayers aren't being dealt with unfairly.
So a lot of this will
I'm in favor
require,
of it.
you'll note on our calendar here that we've got the presentation of the Board of Selectmen and Board of Education budgets, and that's on March 5th. And so those are budgets that those boards have voted on.
Yes.
Right, and so look on your schedule, it says March 5th, 2019, that Tuesday. That's when the Board of Selectmen and Board of Education budgets are presented to us. That means those boards have voted on those budgets, and the budgets are in our hands.
Yeah.
So what we want to do is make sure that we have listened to their presentations, come up with our questions, gotten answers to those questions, conceivably met with department heads to get any concerns addressed before they vote on these budgets or before we have final budgets presented to us. Because, at that point, I mean, ideally, if we could get feedback to them before they vote on their budgets, perhaps they could take that into account. Again, I say this just in the spirit of us providing our input such that maybe it can be taken into account before we get the budgets, in which case, if we're going to make changes, there are cuts to the budgets these guys have already approved. So I'm not saying we have to do that in that accelerated time frame, but just a consideration. So assuming you all are amenable to maybe trying this, what I'll do is, Jen, I'll give you a call sometime to just talk this further through, and also maybe get Kate on the phone where we can talk about this. I'd certainly encourage you to mention this to her tomorrow, and then we can give this a whirl.
And if I can make a couple of comments on it, it's something that Kate, Jamie, and I have spoken about, and
we talked about.
Yeah, and part of it, what we'd like to do is give you the information that you need so you know that you've made an informed decision on the budget and you're able to do your due diligence. But we're also trying to balance that with acknowledging and respecting first Kate's role as the town administrator and putting forward what she thinks is necessary to run the town. And then the Board of Selectmen's role of the executive branch of the government of our town, saying this is what they would like to recommend. And what we're really trying to, one thing we're trying to address is if a department wanted something that doesn't make it forward from Kate or from the Board of Selectmen, we're trying to eliminate that end run around those boards and appealing to the higher power. Because either Kate or the Board of Selectmen, as the administrator and the executives, have made the decision to not put something forward. So we're trying to find that balance with giving you the information and the access to the departments who may have some more detailed information, but also respecting and acknowledging the roles of the milestones that come before you in the budget
What I'd really like to do is limit our role to correcting profligacy and error. Right. So,
John, if I may make one more thing. Part of the reason of the buddy system was because of the fiasco that happened in an RTM meeting. And the fact is that I wanted the Board of Finance to understand what F&B was thinking before you guys voted on it. But something else that we have done with the Board of Selectmen is that the night before they're voting on their budget, which is really earlier in February, not at that March date, we're given an opportunity to discuss areas of concern. So they know if, not that there's a lot, but if there is an area of concern, they're hearing about it before they're voting on the budget. And I think that, not that it's changed anything or that we've cut anything in the future, but I think it makes sure that exactly what you're talking about, we're getting out ahead, because once a board has voted on something and then you guys have voted on something, the horse is really already out the gate. You're the only ones who, you guys, when you figure out how to pay for things, like I've explained 4 times this year, that no, the Board of Ed capital request is actually down from last year. It doesn't look that way because we bonded $1.5 million. So, but that's a payment issue, not a Board of Ed issue. So that's another thing, is to get feedback into those boards before they're voting. And, you know, Rob, I'm curious if you can add to that, because you did it for a number of years. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the timeline, speeding it up a little bit, I guess, if you want to call it that. Actually, before I take that, you took one of my questions a little bit. When we go to page 2, Jen on this, or John, where it says Feb 2nd, final vote on budget, is that Board of Selectmen? And then are we carrying that for?
It's not us.
Yeah, it's Board of Selectmen.
That's BOS, right?
Yep.
Where are you?
Page 2,
Yeah,
February 12th.
okay.
Says-
Oh, February 12th, yeah.
Is that
That's the
BOS?
Board of Selectmen's final.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So-
they'll do a
so in
vote, then
essence-
there's winter break, and then finally the meeting where the budgets are actually handed to us is the 5th. So
Is
yeah,
that-
if we speed up the process, it'd be great to get input in before they have that final vote, but not imperative.
Right.
But it really does kind of speed us up, John, right? Like,
It
we
would
have,
speed us up a lot.
we get it on the 28th, and we gotta figure out the BOS by the 12th, right? So this goes a little
Yeah.
bit to what you were just saying. Like, I was just trying to think about the condensing of all this. We've always tried to get ahead of it,
Yeah,
right? And
the-
it started probably about 6
The
years ago
advantage-
when the chip.
The advantage of that is that we would have our input to them before they vote on their budget.
Right,
As
right.
opposed to our input afterwards, in which case our input results in a cut to their budget.
Right,
So as a
right.
courtesy, they get to consider, and we may still cut it, but
Right.
as a courtesy, they get our input before they vote. So, to be honest, I'm not quite sure the degree of alacrity we can move forward to get all this done. So I got to kind of think about that, but I think the general sense of this around minimizing bureaucracy and getting through this process is really what we want to adhere to. And even if our input comes after they vote on their budget, I'm okay with that as part of this experiment. We'll sharpen this up as we get more experience in doing it this way.
I'm in favor of it, John. It just feels like it's compressed the timeline a little for us, right? So unless we're going with that, what you just said at the very end there, where you're like, we can still add our comments afterwards, I think it's interesting that we still have to do it within almost like 14 days, right?
Yeah, I'm a
We're gonna
little
go to
worried about
meetings, look at it, and that includes butting up with you guys, right?
Yep.
And your team, and then the 12th. So I'm not asking we push the 12th back if we want to do the 12th, but kind of the experimentation, if we're doing this year, is kind of interesting, because I don't remember us voting that early. I might be
We don't.
No, we don't vote till April.
No.
No, not us, sorry. I'm
No, I
talking
think
No,
they
they
always
always
did.
vote.
They always
That was
voted.
before break, right?
Okay.
Yeah, because that gives us time to produce the document, prepare a presentation, because by charter, it has to be presented to you the first Tuesday in March.
Yeah, but I think for
Just
John's
for
comment,
clarification, it's not that we won't necessarily, that we can't have any comments afterwards. It's just
No, I was just
that
trying
we
to
give
get
them a
them-
window into
Correct.
what we're thinking
Thank you,
ahead of
yeah.
time.
but I think in that time frame, if we get the books on the 28th, like that's when it's presented, right? We'll get
You'll get Kate's budget book on the 28th.
the 28th, and we start the 29th, the 30th, and the 4th, like in terms of in the 5th, the review. Like, we don't even meet as a group between the 5th, when the last, when the last department is discussed, and when we need to give them feedback,
Yeah.
so that they can take that into consideration before they vote.
We're meeting on 19th.
And so
I
that's
would
when it's
just
already
say
passed.
that I would like to preserve the Board of Selectmen's ability to go through their budget process and their deliberations. What I'm hearing, it sounds like a bit more involved on your part early on in the process before, Kate is going to put forward whatever. She may put forward, another shrine to Jack. And if you're
can't have
providing.
enough of those.
Okay, a shrine to John. And, I would like the Board of Selectmen to have time to have their deliberation on that and make a decision on Kate's budget.
So that's fair. Maybe we take this same approach of sort of minimal involvement with department heads, if not none, and really pose our questions once the Board of Selectmen have
Because
voted.
that's really the official request that moves forward to you.
Then that's fine. I think that's fine. And then we have 5 weeks between when we actually receive those budgets and when we vote to set the mill rate. So there's plenty of time
Right.
to pose questions to Kate, to have Kate come and talk to us, to work with Jack, to do all these other things, just like we've done before. And if, by the way, we find that there's one or two departments that we still want to talk to, there's time in that time frame to get it done.
John, I would, my own experience, and again, Rob has a lot more of this experience on this side than I do, but I think that during the budget presentations, the questions that we ask typically are the major things, and only if you have like a civilian issue, right, dispatch, does that require further information or discussion, or if you see something that's going slightly amiss in a police department. So that what has happened in F&B, with the exception of the year that we weren't sure what the state was doing with some of our funding until later, F&B has worked so that about 5 minutes after you approve the budget, we're ready to vote on it. Because we've made our comments, you're aware of it, and everything, and we're coordinated. So we are done with the budget really, having been on this for 12 years, we are legitimately done 2 to 3 weeks before I had been over the prior 8-9 years.
But Jack, just as a comment though, and this is just a little bit of recent history, we have we've created and incorporated a buddy system with F&B and the RTM broadly that is much improved. And so there's a higher confidence, greater collegiality, more sharing, just general more comity. I mean, there's just a more civil process going on here.
Isn't that what government's supposed to do?
I would hope so, but we've done it, and it works now. And I'm not suggesting we shouldn't do this. I am just, I want to say hallelujah again.
I am too.
But we don't want to lose this. So same thing for F&B. You guys have to lean in, and we all have to be coordinated. We're just actually accelerating this whole process over the next 5 weeks.
And, Bert is the new vice chair of, he's the new Rob.
Strikingly similar.
Yes, very much so. But yes, it still will require, and it may require more coordination because of the time frame that's there, but it's not something that I don't believe we can do.
I use an example, though. I don't know when it was, Jack. I just want to make sure everybody sees what I'm seeing here. I don't know when it was, but it's a while ago. And it was, Jim, your F&B chair, and I think you got shot at the RTM, and it was essentially just simply that we hadn't bubbled up we weren't inclusive, and it was, geez, we weren't aware of that. Well, if you'd come to the meetings and you'd done your homework, you would have been aware of it, but there was a sense that they weren't included, which was never the intention. And, we fixed that just by buddying up. But that was an unfortunate, it was iterative. The process was iterative. Well, we're not going to have to look at that until the end. Well, the decisions have already really been made, so what are you, just a rubber stamp? And, it just was the Rodney Dangerfield effect. We don't get no respect. Well, if you'd come to the meetings, we would have invited you. But there wasn't a buddy system, and there wasn't openness, and there wasn't the collegiality early on. We just got to keep that up.
I will.
That point about not having access to all the meetings, okay? If you remember, that was a turning point where, a lot of people just said, well, I didn't have access to all that information. I couldn't go to the meeting. It was held at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Thursday. If you remember, that next budget year is when we spent $65 to create the Vimeo account.
Yeah, that's right.
Which we now tape everything, right? And so
Which is
I think that's what really began to change the way people sort of reviewed all these meetings and was able to become more informed.
I would also add something else. We have a different town administrator who works with people. The prior town administrator did not. And some of the pushback that you were seeing were because questions were given to the Board of Selectmen, and we did not get answers, or the answers we got were treating us as if we were first-year accounting students. And if you looked at the members who were on that board, it was rather insulting. And so some people decided to punish the Board of Selectmen for that person's actions. That being said, it's not, just John who has been wonderful in opening up the opportunity for this, but it's also been working with Kate. So, that's part of why this whole thing is working the way it is.
Okay.
But a big part of it is that because these things are all taped, everybody can see. I think it's...
Yeah.
We spent 15 minutes going nowhere.
All right, let me draw this to a close. Jen, I'll have a conversation with you, and I'll try to codify exactly how this is going to work in a little bit more detail, but consistent with the spirit of the recommendation, which is to change how we're meeting with folks. Okay. Financial report.
One moment. The main item that I want to talk about on the financial report is related to our property tax collection. The tax collector, we are just in the middle of our January collection period, but compared year over year, comparing to the last few years, she's seeing that January collections are lower than they have been. She's not quite sure what is causing it. She's not. She doesn't think she's going to have a good sense of the cause or really the impact, see if it really is that collections are lower, or is it just that people are going to wait till the end of the month. So she's not going to have a sense of really what's going on until February or March, but she did want to make people aware that January collections look to be off compared to prior years. She has a couple of theories, one of which is actually related to the federal SALT changes, and that perhaps because people are not able to deduct it, it may be changing their behavior in the way that they pay their local property taxes. It's one theory, but she doesn't really know until January is done and she can kind of analyze it, what's going on. I don't think it's hugely off. I don't think it's going to have a significant impact, but it is something that we need to be aware of and we need to keep our eye on. So I will keep you informed of that with any information that she shares. And then also on the revenue side, building permits, again, just like in the prior year, we're subject to the timing of the redevelopment projects. We may get some permit revenue in this year. It may, again, push into the next year. But on general building permits, they've seen a decrease in residential permit activity, but a significant increase in commercial activity, which is more than offsetting the residential.
Okay.
Jen, on the tax collections, I don't know if this is probably it, but if we're looking at January versus January, did people pay like last December 6th?
Yeah,
January
last January is not the only thing she's comparing it to, because it was very strange because a lot of people prepaid or paid early in December to get it into that tax year. And then we had a significant round of refunds in January. So last January is not the base that we want to compare against. She's looking longer term.
But to me, that was just like an obvious, but if it's not January versus Jan, then...
Yeah, she's looking longer term, and she just sees a trend where it's lower than she would expect to see at this point in the month.
Yeah, the reality is around property taxes, we know what the number is supposed to be. Your degrees of freedom in terms of not paying property taxes are extremely low. So in the scheme of things, I'm not really worried about us not collecting this revenue.
Right.
Yeah.
There may be timing issues in terms of a few months, but the idea that somehow there's a statistically significant drop-off in revenue, that's not going to happen.
Yes, I agree.
Okay. Any other comments on the financial report? Anyone have any questions?
I don't have anything else that I wanted to highlight. We are doing better than budget on state revenues because we budgeted so conservatively. That'll be something we should keep in mind as we work through the next budget process. striking that balance between conservative enough, and we don't want to be too conservative and tax for something that we do expect to get. But we're doing all right on those, and I haven't heard any rumblings of any of those being threatened.
The only thing I might mention, and this can be for a future meeting, you, Kate, and Jamie had raised the question of whether there should be a fund balance policy for the sewer and the parking funds.
Yes.
And maybe we could discuss all that. As I was reflecting on it, maybe there's a question is, why do we have fund balance for those particular operating entities? I don't actually know the answer to that. So maybe all that can be considered, say, at our next meeting, just to say, let's talk about this, what your recommendation would be, and an answer to that question, which is why do we have separate fund balances for those entities? Okay, anything else on the financial report? Other questions?
My only question was on the capital accounts. I know we typically like round up each project, add some cost of issuance. I know that the field looks like we're bonding 585, and it looks like we only spent 490. So
it's not fully spent yet. They have some other work going on, but we factored in that authorization 10. We did factor in for cost of issuance. I will touch base with them and see if they have any reason why they think they're not going to fully spend that money. Okay. If we were to borrow, say we fully borrow that, and by the time they're done, there's excess funds, that can be transferred to another bond authorized project to minimize what has to be borrowed on a future project.
John, the building permits that do seem to be really running behind, even with the crossover between residential and commercial, are you expecting that gap to be closed by the end of this year?
Yeah, our base permit number in there is about 1.2 million. And what are we at? 5 something, which is kind of consistent with where we've been the last couple of years at this time, because they did make a change in the way that permits are pulled. So now you pull for like a foundation and then another permit for further construction. It used to be that you would pull the full amount up front, so we used to get more money up front, and now it's spread out. So where we are right now is consistent with where we've been in the last couple of years, which gets us about 1.2 of base normal permit activity.
And then with the budget of 2 million, where's the other 800 coming from? Is that from
That's the redevelopment projects.
Yeah, okay. And that's on track?
There's 2 that are working their way through planning and zoning. The timing is still not known. I think demolition may begin in the summer is the last that I heard. But they're not fully approved through P&Z yet.
Other questions on the financial report? Okay. Approval of minutes. I went through these and did not have any edits or questions on any of this. They're pretty good, other than just as a general matter, when we have attendance, I'd like present and absent cited. So in this case, it looks like Jim was not here, but you can't tell that. Right. So just to keep track of that, who's here and who isn't. So that was my only add for the November minutes. Anyone else have any edits or questions? They look good. Yeah, they look good. Motion to approve. Okay, Paul, second. Diana, all in favor? Okay, so this will be 5-0 to 1 with Jim abstaining. Okay. Special assignment or committee reports, given the late hour, we ought to either defer those till next time, or unless there's something urgent for anybody to bring up. And on the list are cafeteria building, pear tree, unions, which Frank does, he's not here tonight, pension boards, anything on that, and we have the new Oxbridge Building Committee was just formed this week. I'm going to sit on that committee, so there will be more to report on that. So,
we have agreed to with Jen's efforts, Friday afternoon, the 25th.
Yes.
We're having our review with the audit.
Oh, great.
Yes.
Oh, terrific. All right, that's great. Great.
The cafeteria is done.
Fantastic.
Basically, and we have a small contingency that'll probably be returned to the town.
Wonderful. Okay, we didn't have to add to that. That's good.
And responses to the RFP for pear tree are coming in, and those will be reviewed between now and the 23rd.
Okay.
And we'll
torches and pitchforks and, okay, hopefully not.
It's actually been going quite well.
Shades
We've had lots of room for public comment and
I'm-
some tweaking to the RFP in response. And
Yeah, the great thing about all these committees is that no matter who's on them, the public will be heard. And that's a great thing about this town. If you got something to say, show up at the board meetings, you know where they are and where they're going to be, just show up and make yourself heard, so. Okay, I have no chairman's report. If there's any other business, we could adopt that. Anything else? Motion to adjourn? Paul, second. Rob? All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you.